Welcome to NOAA Live Alaska. My name is Lisa Heveruki-Raring, and I'm going to be moderating today's webinar. This series is a collaborative effort by NOAA Fisheries Alaska Fisheries Science Center, where I work, NOAA's Alaska Regional Collaboration Network, and NOAA's National Weather Service. This webinar series is designed to help you get to know NOAA's work in Alaska and how we connect and work with your communities. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, studies the ocean and the atmosphere and where the two meet, from weather to ocean to the animals that live around us, from small to large. All of our speakers work for some part of NOAA or work in partnership with NOAA. We hope this gives you a sneak peek at different career paths you might be interested in. Today, we're introducing you to Deana Crouser, who works for NOAA Fisheries Alaska Fisheries Science Center in Seattle, Washington. While we'll be talking about NOAA's role in research and stewardship, we want to recognize that we are all coming to you from the traditional lands of Native communities who have substantial traditional and local knowledge and much to share with us. In Alaska, Deana's work is conducted in the Chukchi Sea, Bering Sea, and Gulf of Alaska, which include the traditional home waters of the Nupiat, Yupiat, Siberian Yupiat, Unanga, Sugpiaq, Iyak, Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian. We'd also like to acknowledge that Deana is presenting from, and we're hosting this webinar from, the traditional lands of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. A few guidelines before I hand you over to Deana. You're all muted because we have a lot of people on the line and we want to make sure that everyone can hear our speaker. However, there's a box where you can write questions. Many of you have already been writing in your names and where you're calling from. We encourage you to ask them as we go, ask your questions as we go. And my colleague, Chris Beyer, and I will be keeping track of questions behind the scenes for Deana. She'll stop every now and again and answer a few questions. We may not get to all of our questions, but we'll try to answer as many as we can. All right, I'll hand it over to Deana to introduce herself.
Hi. My name is Deana Crouser, and I am a zooplankton ecologist at NOAA. An ecologist is just someone who studies the relationship between an organism like a shark or an elephant or monkey or even a cactus, because plants are organisms too, and their environment or ecosystem. Now, I would like to hear from you. What are some examples of an ecosystem?
Okay, so if you would like to type in what you think an ecosystem is into the question box where you've been typing, we can get some answers from our audiences about what they think an ecosystem is. So I am seeing that a couple of people might think that an ecosystem is the interaction of plants and animals in a given area. That's what Kip is saying. Marilee is saying an ocean. JG is saying a machine. And Javen is saying anywhere you look. And so what would you define an ecosystem as, Deana?
An ecosystem is an environment where certain animals live. So Nemo lives on a coral reef. That's Nemo's ecosystem. Sharks live in the ocean. Elephants live on a savanna. Monkeys live in a jungle or rainforest. Cactus will live in a savanna. So these are examples of ecosystems. And so I study the relationship between zooplankton and their aquatic ecosystem off the coast of Alaska. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Miami, Florida. I love to swim at the beach and go snorkeling to see coral reefs. I also spent a lot of time in the Florida Everglades, which is a very special and unique wetland, another type of ecosystem. There were always a lot of alligators there, and I love to spot them out. And when I was 26 years old, I moved to Seattle, Washington, and it was here that I got to see my favorite animals in the whole world, orcas, swimming in the wild. And the orcas here in Washington are really, really cool because their favorite food is salmon, just like me. When I first started college, I originally wanted to be an engineer. But after a few years, I was no longer very excited at my choice in major, and my grades reflected that. And one of my guidance counselors noticed that I wasn't doing as well as all the other students, and she recommended that I look into other majors. So I thought really hard about what I wanted to do, and I realized that I have loved and respected everything about water and our oceans for as long as I could remember. So I decided to major in oceanography at the University of Washington. And there I did research on zooplankton, which are little critters that salmon like to eat. And I wanted to make sure that salmon had enough food to eat so that the orcas and me and I had enough food to eat too. I graduated with my bachelor's degree in 2019, and after that, I started working at NOAA, where now I study zooplankton in Alaska's waters, which is where a lot of the fish you see at grocery stores come from. So let's talk about fish food. Now, plankton from the show SpongeBob SquarePants is one of my favorite types of zooplankton, and he is a copepod. So what are zooplankton, and what are some examples from them? Does anyone know what zooplankton are, or does anyone have any examples of a zooplankton?
Okay, so if you can think of an example of a zooplankton, or you can think of a definition of what a zooplankton is, type it into your question box and we'll see what kind of answers we get. So I know, Deana, that we talk a lot about plankton and that there are there's different kinds of plankton. Juliana is saying they're drifters of the sea. Cheryl is saying maybe they're diatoms. Cheryl's calling in from Palmer High School. Lorena is thinking that they are marine clodocerans, polychaetes, copepods, cnidarians. So those are all different categories of zooplankton. Ola is saying microscopic larval and juvenile forms of animals. And so Carol is asking, are small animals that eat plankton, zooplankton? And then Javen is saying baby animals because zoology means the study of animals. Kip is saying microscopic animals that get their energy from the phytoplankton. And Michelle is saying small organisms in the sea.
Oh my God.
So what do you think, Deana?
I am really, really impressed by all of your answers. So as we heard, there are a lot of different types of zooplankton, and maybe some of you have eaten some. They're sometimes really, really tiny, about the size of a grain of rice. And sometimes they're really, really big, about the size of your finger, like a shrimp, or even fit in the palm of your hand, like a jellyfish. I've got some samples here that I brought from work. Here are some copepods. Here, I'm going to make this bigger for you so you can see. There we go. Can you see me bigger? Here are some little zooplankton. These are copepods. See how tiny they are, like the size of a grain of rice. And I also have some little euphausids. Let's see, there we go. Some little shrimp. You can see their little eyes.
They're a little bigger, huh?
Yeah, they're a little bit bigger. And they would get as big as your finger, but they're much smaller in here. I've also got some little crabs, which are like almost my favorite. There we go. They're kind of hard to see in here. There we go. That might be better. Look at those. You can see their little tails. And I've got some jellyfish too. These are bigger. See, I'll swish them around so you can see them moving. There you go. These are about the size of maybe like a small ball, like a ping pong ball. There we go. So one thing they all have in common is that they are really not very strong swimmers. So they do tend to drift with the current, like someone mentioned, in the ocean. Has anyone gone to the beach and while you're playing in the water over time, noticed that you've drifted along the shore away from where your towel and shoes are? Then you may be drifting organisms too. Some zooplankton will spend their whole life as a drifting organism, but some zooplankton are only bad swimmers when they're babies, and then when they grow up and they get bigger and stronger, they can swim or even crawl wherever they like an octopus or a crab. This is a diagram of a marine food web, and a food web describes how energy and nutrients moves through an ecosystem. Now, phytoplankton are considered primary producers, and they make up the base of the marine food chain. So you can see these are where the phytoplankton are. And primary means first, so they're the first producers in the marine food web. And phytoplankton, they get their energy from the sun using photosynthesis. And phytoplankton are what a lot of zooplankton eat, although sometimes some zooplankton eat other smaller zooplankton. Zooplankton are considered primary consumers. So they are the first consumers in the marine web because they eat or consume phytoplankton. Using this diagram, who can tell me what type of consumers herring are? Now notice they are the second consumers in the food web.
So if you can think of, what Deana was talking about is that the zooplankton are the primary consumers because they're the first consumers that eat the phytoplankton or the plants. And so what do you think that the herring are? And I'm getting a lot of people saying, so Karen and Lorena are both saying secondary consumer. So Akutan School is also saying secondary consumers. So it seems like as you go up the triangle there, you're getting different levels of consumers.
Correct.
So,
good job.
Yeah.
Yeah, so each level of food web is called a trophic level. One of the most surprising things I learned in school was only 10% of energy or nutrients is transferred from one trophic level to the next. So only 10% of the total amount of energy you can get from all the algae in the sea is transferred to the next trophic level where the zooplankton are. And that's because as animals grow in size, they require more energy to keep them going. Think about how much food your parents eat compared to how much food a baby eats, or how much food a large dog will eat when compared to a cat. Well, where does this energy go? Animals burn energy in many ways, like by swimming when looking for food. It costs energy to breathe and even to have babies. Just having a lot of muscle like sharks do requires a lot of energy. And that is why the rock eats so much food. We also have to take into consideration that sometimes fish die, so the energy they could have provided to the next trophic level is lost. There's also the fact that you don't always consume the whole organism when you eat it. We don't eat the shell of a crab or the bones of a fish, and all that took energy to make, but that energy can't be transferred to the next trophic level. So as you can see, there are a lot of things that limit the flow of energy in the food web, and that is why so little makes it to the top. This is a picture of a water column, which is a column of water from the surface of the sea to the very bottom. Now, what is the difference between the top, A, and the bottom, D? I'd love to hear from you. What do you think the difference is between the very top of the water column and the very bottom of the water column?
So let's see. So Kip is saying that the amount of sunlight is different from the top to the bottom. Karen is saying the temperature differs from A through D. Akutan School is saying that it's darker from A to D, so that gets back to the sunlight. Cheryl is also saying temperature. Devin is saying the water pressure is different. Karen is saying that the oxygen levels might be different at the different levels. And then, boy, we're getting a lot of different answers here. Lorena and Michelle are saying that there's a salinity difference, so the amount of salt in the water might be different from top to bottom. And then Carol is saying depth and sunlight temperature, so that's a combination of all of the answers that we've gotten so far. So
those are all right. Those are awesome answers. Yeah, the color or the amount of light, it's darker at the bottom of the ocean when compared to the surface, and all the other things that you had mentioned, those are all correct. I'm very, very impressed. So knowing that phytoplankton need a lot of light from the sun to grow, where do you think we'd find them in the water column? Will we see A, B, C, or D?
Okay, so let's see. Texas is saying A, Kip is saying A. We're getting a lot of A's here. Karina is saying A as well.
Right.
So is that what you're at? Yes, most of the answers are saying A.
Yeah, and now knowing zooplankton eat phytoplankton and they're not very good swimmers, where do you think we'd find them in the water column?
Okay, so where do you think you'd find these animals? Kip is saying A again. Who else? Let's see. Akutan School is saying A. Everybody so far is saying A, so they all think that they're floating around in A section.
All
Although
right.
Michelle is saying B, so So we got a couple of people saying a little bit different, but most people think it's the top.
Okay. All right, so zooplankton do this really cool thing called diel vertical migration. And diel means that during the day, diel means during the day, and vertical means up and down. So this is a migration pattern where zooplankton swim deep down in the water during the day, where the light is very poor, to avoid being eaten by predators like fish that have a really good eyesight. So that would be around the B area. So for those who said B, they do make it down there. And when the sun goes down at night, they swim to the surface of the water to feed on algae and other phytoplankton when it's harder for predators to see them. Now, remember, they're not very strong swimmers, and the best they can do is swim up and down, and sometimes in little circles and short little bursts of energy. And this is one of the ways that zooplankton burn energy, by avoiding getting eaten. So when zooplankton eat phytoplankton, they receive 100% of the energy they get from their food, but they may burn 50% of that energy just by swimming back down to avoid the fish that might see them in the light. So that's 50% of the energy they burn swimming will never make it up the food web. One of the ways that we observe this as scientists is by using an echo sounder, which is similar to the echolocation that whales and dolphins use. So we place these echo sounders sometimes deep down at the bottom of the water column, and sometimes we submerge it from the ship at the surface of the water column. And we transmit this sonar, which travels through the water. And once the sonar hits something like a school of zooplankton, the echo bounces back to the transmitter. And once it reaches us, because we know how fast the sonar travels through water, we can do a little bit of math and calculate how far away the zooplankton are, based on how long it took the echo to reach them and come back to the transmitter. This is what we see on board when we use echo sounders. Think about playing music on a guitar. Some strings have high notes and some strings are low, and each string gets off its own unique sound based on how thick the string is and how fast it vibrates when you pull it. We can use our ear to tell the difference between a high note and a low note while listening to music. Oceanographers use this cool machine to read sounds that we can't hear. And this is how we can tell the difference between a school of fish and a school of krill, because each animal has its own signature note or frequency. I'll pause here if we have any questions before I go on to the next section.
Okay, so if you have any questions for Deana about the zooplankton that she's been talking about, please type in your question here. We do have a question that a lot of people ask our presenters, which is, what is the favorite part of your job?
My favorite part of my job is looking at plankton underneath of a microscope and playing with them and counting them. I have these cool little tools that I use. I'll make my screen bigger so you can see me. There you go. I have these cool little tools that I use, like a little suction to suck them out of little vials, and I use these really cool tweezers that are really, really sharp and pointy. And I take this little tray, and I take my zooplankton and I pour them in here, and I just look at these under a microscope all day, and I count them, and I'll tell you what kind of zooplankton it is, and I can tell you how old it is, and if it's a girl or a boy. And I think that's my favorite part. I love spending time on a microscope looking at all the different zooplankton, because they're different sizes and shapes and colors. So that's the favorite part about my job.
And then another question is, what is the strangest zooplankton that you've seen?
Oh my goodness. There's this one type of copepod that has really, really big claws, but one of them's really small and the other claw's really big, and their body's like a little twisted, and they're really, really funny looking. There's also this other one that I have right here for you that is also really funny looking. These are called amphipods. Let's see. There you go. It's kind of hard to see them in there, but look at how cool that is. I think those are really, really cool. And they're so small, but they eat a lot of other zooplankton. They're kind of scary. That's where all the zooplankton are running from, bigger zooplankton, because they swim really good and they swim really fast. So those are some of my favorite crazy zooplankton that I like to see.
So you had mentioned that you can tell the girl zooplankton from the boy zooplankton, and so Pamela from Tyonek was asking whether you could you can give an example of how you tell a male from a female, and then Karina was also asking whether you can tell age as well as whether it's a boy or a girl.
So usually for zooplankton and most animals, the female zooplankton are bigger than the male. So I can really just look at two adult zooplankton, and if one is bigger than the other, the odds of the bigger one being the female is very, very high. So all the females are bigger than the males. And I can tell the difference between how old they are based on how many legs they have. So as they get bigger, they grow extra legs, and I'll just count the legs. If they have 3 legs, it'll be like a little teenager. If it has 5 legs, then it's an adult.
And then Akatan School was wondering whether beach hoppers are like zooplankton, or whether they're related or different.
So if I'm not mistaken, I think where I'm from, they may call them, so maybe like the little things that you find in the sand that jump around like sand fleas. There might be a different word, but if they live in the sand and you can dig and see them and they're really teeny, those could be zooplankton.
Okay. And then let's see. Michelle was wondering whether phytoplankton are bioluminescent.
Yes, they are. Some phytoplankton are bioluminescent, and it is really, really, really cool to see. It's how phytoplankton make themselves look bigger. So if all of them are lit up, and it looks like a big giant thing, and maybe some things will avoid eating it, thinking it's really big and scary.
And actually, after you talked about the beach hoppers, Akatan School was saying that they're amphipods. So amphipods are zooplankton, aren't they?
Yes, amphipods are zooplankton, and this is an amphipod. So absolutely, yes, they are.
Cool. All right. Well, I know that you have a lot of other material to cover, so maybe we'll hold the questions that have come up from now, and then we'll keep on going. But if you guys in our audience have more questions, please go ahead and type them in, and we'll answer them as we go.
All right. Well, now I'd love to play one of my favorite games with you, which is Guess Whose Baby Picture. So let's see how good my little zooplankton taxonomists are. We'll start with number 1. Whose baby picture is this? Who thinks this is A, a crab, B, a copepod, C, a shrimp, D, a starfish, or E, an octopus? So when they grow up, what are they going to be?
Okay, so I can see that several people are saying that baby picture is of E. Some people are saying copepod. Kip and Pamela are saying B, which I think is the copepod, right? And yeah. Carl is saying D. So we actually have a bunch of different guesses, because let's see, Juliana, Carol, and Edan are saying E. Kip, Given, and Pamela are saying B. Karen is saying E. John is saying B. Carl is saying D. So we don't have any A's, but it seems to be pretty equally split among the other 4.
All right, let's keep going to see if anyone wants to change their mind. Number 2, what do we think number 2 is?
So number 2, what do you guys think number 2 is? Okay, I'm seeing Carl is saying E, which is the octopus. I think, yeah, most people are saying E for octopus for number 2.
I wonder what number 1 was then.
Yeah.
Number 3?
Okay, number 3. What do you guys think number 3 is? Okay, Juliana thinks that number 3 is B. David is thinking it's a starfish. Karen is thinking D, sorry. Everybody's writing in really quickly here. Kip is thinking C. So it looks like it's kind of getting split among the other ones again. They're a little bit harder to tell apart.
It's a tricky game. It's really surprising.
Yeah, it is.
All right, number 4.
Number 4. What do you guys think number 4 is?
I love these guys. They're so cool. They got this.
Okay, number 4. People are saying number 4 is, let's see, Lorena thinks it's A. Karen thinks it's C. Let's see. I lost where we started here. Some folks are saying shrimp. AACC. So it seems to be split between A, which is I think the crab, and C, which is the shrimp.
I'm impressed by that one. All right, good. And the last one. This is a little.
Last one. Okay,
Yeah.
number 5. Number 5. What do you guys think number 5 is? Okay, Janet thinks it's B, the copepod. Jabin thinks it's the crab. There's a lot of B's, a couple of C's. Texas and Michelle think it's C. Akaton thinks it's B. So this one seems to be split between B, the copepod, and C, the shrimp.
All right, that's good. One of those answers is right. Well, the results are in.
Okay.
Number 1 is starfish.
Wow. That is so different.
It is. Number 2 was the octopus. They are so cute. I've seen a couple of little baby octopus, not that many, but I always get very excited when I see a baby octopus. And number 3 is a crab, which is very surprising to me because the baby has a tail and the adult does not have a tail, and I don't know what happens to it. Number 4 is a copepod, which also like, look at all those little legs. Like it doesn't, where's its tail? I guess it's those little teeny little lines in the back. And number 5 is actually the shrimp, which I think maybe the shrimp, either the shrimp and the octopus mostly look like themselves when they grow up, but the other ones are very confusing. So good job. Well, now that you guys are all professionals, let's look at some videos under the microscope. All right.
All right. So yeah, that game was very tricky in that a lot of the babies look very similar. Okay, and don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is a video of a brittle star, and you can see it moving around. And then we have this.
Okay, so don't forget to unmute.
Yeah, here you can see a jellyfish. You can see little copepods. There goes an amphipod. Look how fast it is. Creating a little vortex.
Look at my shrimp.
I was really excited. I didn't know it was an amphipod. And all these little dots you see are little copepod eggs. And you can see some phytoplankton in here too. All right. And for our last video, let's see. There we go. I think it's this one. There we go. This is known as a sea butterfly. And if you see this here, this is actually a baby crab carrying something around. I'll play that one again because it's one of my favorites. Look at them going in circles. All right. Okay, there we go. Can you see my screen again?
So we're seeing your screen and the next slide.
Okay, let's see. I'll get a different one. There we go. How's that?
That looks good.
Okay, all right. Let's keep it moving. Do we have any questions from those videos?
So Carol was wondering whether the videos were under a microscope and whether that one, I think it was the video with all of the jellyfish and the copepods, whether they were eating.
Yes. So those were underneath of a microscope, and the jellyfish was trying to swim and pull in some stuff to eat, and so was the amphipod. When he was kicking up things, he was trying to put things in his mouth. So when he kicks his feet like that, all of the water would go in his mouth and he could eat through things. So they were all alive and they were all under a microscope, just caught.
Very cool. And Juliana was wondering whether the baby version of zooplankton is called Nauplius for all species or just for specific zooplankton?
Just for specific zooplankton, but a lot of them are Nauplii. So that's really good.
Okay, I know you have a lot more stuff to go through, so maybe we should keep moving because it's 11:30 right now.
Oh, good job. Thank you for keeping me on track. Okay. Well, now I want to talk about a really special place where a lot of my research is conducted, Alaska's eastern Bering Sea shelf. Now, this is the continental shelf, which is a portion of a continent that's submerged under an area of relatively shallow water compared with the open ocean. And if we have any geology fans here today, the continental shelf is part of the continental crust. Who can tell me which continent this is?
All right, so Akutan School is saying this is where we live. So yeah, if you know which continental shelf this is, please write it in. I think most folks are not quite sure, so maybe you can let us know.
So this is part of the North American continental shelf, the North American continent as itself.
All right, we did get Akutan School and Eve and Michelle all wrote North America. As I was saying, we're not quite sure.
Good job, good job.
So I spoke too soon.
The eastern Bering Sea shelf is also known as the Bering Sea greenbelt. And a greenbelt is a highly productive ecosystem. And this means it's supported by a lot of phytoplankton and zooplankton, which we learned produce all of the energy for the marine food web. And there are a lot of reasons this area is highly productive. One reason are the tides and currents bring in nutrients from deep down in the ocean, like carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus, which phytoplankton need to perform photosynthesis. And this abundance of nutrients allows for large blooms of phytoplankton, which in turn supports large masses of zooplankton. And this large abundance of zooplankton attracts fish and squid, which in turn attracts large numbers of marine birds and mammals. And this diversity of life is what makes the Bering Sea greenbelt so beautifully productive. Here is another view of a water column. In addition to nutrient availability, another reason the Eastern Bering Sea shelf is so productive is because of the euphotic zone. Also known as the sunlit zone, this is the uppermost layer of a body of water that receives sunlight, allowing phytoplankton to perform photosynthesis. The euphotic zone is also an area where the most oxygen is observed in the ocean, allowing it to support more life because everything alive has to breathe. 90% of all marine life that lives in the ocean lives in the euphotic zone. So there are actually two ways in which the ocean gets its oxygen, from the atmosphere through crashing waves and from mixing with the air. And we call this the air-sea gas exchange. And it goes both ways. The ocean can lose gas to the atmosphere as well as gain it. And generally it gains more than it loses. And through photosynthesis. But photosynthesis can only produce oxygen during the day when the sun is out. And now we breathe and consume oxygen and produce carbon dioxide, just like fish do in the ocean. And we always have to breathe, regardless of whether or not the sun is out. So phytoplankton produce so much oxygen just during a few hours a day that alone can support breathing for majority of marine life, 24 hours a day. I think that's crazy. Do we have any questions before I go on to the next section?
So we did have a couple of questions from before when you were talking about the zooplankton under the microscope. Carol was wondering how you get those videos, what kind of equipment do you use to take the video of the microscopic animals?
I actually just used my cell phone, the one where we saw the little amphipod running around. I just took my camera on my cell phone and I put it up to the eye that I look into the microscope, and I was able to get that video. So a lot of times at work, I just take my little cell phone and I mount it to, I have this little plastic contraption that like helps it sit on my microscope, and I can line it up just right so I can see with my phone.
That's very cool. And I know that there are really inexpensive lenses that you can buy to put onto your phone, your phone camera, that can act as tiny microscopes if you're looking at things on the beach. So that's great.
Yeah.
There's also a question about how do you check the numbers for zooplankton? Like how do you know whether the zooplankton numbers are high or low?
So when we take a sample, we can calculate and say like, well, this is how much water we took. And then in that water, we'll say we found 50 copepods. And if we know that there are 50 copepods in about 1 cup of water, and we know how much water is in the ocean, we can kind of multiply it up and get an estimate. We don't really know exactly how many zooplankton are in the water, but we do math and make estimates to kind of make an educated guess.
Great. And then Akatan School was wondering whether the clarity of the water is a factor in how productive the euphotic zone is.
It is. Well, if you notice, the main difference that I think is really cool is when you go to like tropical areas and you have like beautiful blue water that you can see straight down to the bottom, that actually means there's not a lot of life there. There's a lot of sun, but there's not a lot of life, and that's why you can see down to the bottom. But when you look at the water and you can't really see down, it's really green, and you can't see the bottom, that means that it's highly productive. There's a lot of life here, and that's what prevents you from seeing the bottom. So blue water means there's not a lot of productivity, not a lot of life, and green water means there's lots of life, lots of productivity.
And then Mrs. Davis's first, second, and third graders were wondering if zooplankton are in all oceans or only in Alaska.
Zooplankton are so cool because they are in every single body of water all over the planet. So in lakes and rivers and oceans, you can find them everywhere. That's why I love them so much.
They were also wondering about narwhals and if they eat zooplankton. And I know that you're a zooplankton expert and not a narwhal expert, so I'm wondering whether maybe they might be able to look that up on the internet.
Yeah, I hope so. My educated guess is the narwhals will probably eat the fish that eat the zooplankton.
I think that you're probably right about that. So Mrs. Davis's class were saying salt and freshwater, so they are in salt and freshwater, and yes, I think that you were saying that they're in lakes and rivers as well.
Correct.
Okay, so Karina was asking whether the zooplankton whether the euphotic zone actually needs sun or just enough daylight through clouds for the phytoplankton to be productive.
Well, actually, even if there are clouds outside and you can't see the sun rays still make it through. That's why you should always wear sunscreen, even if it's cloudy outside. So they can get it all throughout the day, whether there are clouds or not, because the sun rays will get through and they'll help make photosynthesis, the sun for photosynthesis.
Great. And then Karen was just wanting to know to double check that blue water is warmer and less oxygenated, whereas cold water has more oxygen and more phytoplankton. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. All right. Well, I know you have a lot more material to go through, so let's keep on moving.
There's so much to share.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting there though. Okay, next one. All right, so now I would like to talk about climate change and Alaska's ecosystem. So the marine ecosystem off of Alaska's coast sustain North America's richest fisheries, which are a place for catching fish or taking other sea animals like crab. Alaska exports more than 1 million metric tons of seafood each year, bringing in over $3 billion worth of new money for the economy and through jobs for local fishermen and through the selling of fish to locals and grocery stores all around the country. Unfortunately, warming ocean temperatures are believed to have had a major effect on the health of our fisheries. And some of you may even recognize this graph of seafloor temperatures from a previous NOAA Live Alaska presentation. So some sunlight that hits the Earth is reflected out of the atmosphere, and some of that light becomes heat. Carbon dioxide, the air that we breathe out, and other gases in the atmosphere actually trap heat, keeping the Earth warm. And we call this the greenhouse effect, and it's really similar to putting a blanket around the Earth to warm it. Have any of you noticed that when you wear dark colors on a sunny day, your shirt gets really hot? Well, if you swapped out that dark shirt for a light shirt, you wouldn't be as hot. And that is because dark colors absorb heat and light colors reflect heat. And now that we understand this, I'd like you to tell me, what would you wear if it was really cold outside, but the sun was out, would you wear dark colors or light colors?
So if you think about when it's really cold out, like I heard that in Juneau it was very cold the other day, what color would you wear? And Karen and Deana are both saying dark. Kip is saying dark colors. Karina is saying dark colors. Eve and Jasper are saying black. So the darkest color of all. Yeah, most people are saying dark colors is what they would wear if it was sunny out but cold.
All right, it looks like we have a lot of people living through experience. Now, if it was summertime and really hot outside, what color would you wear? Would you wear dark colors or light colors?
Okay, so, and actually Eve had wanted to let us know that it's currently 1 degree in Juneau, so it is quite cold there. But to answer your question about if it's hot out, a lot of people are saying light colors, white or light colors. Texas says orange, so you know, maybe that's a color preference rather than a light or dark thing. But most everybody is saying that during the summer they would wear light colors.
Good job, good job. So light colors like sea ice reflect light, and it's like wearing a white shirt on a hot summer day. But dark colors absorb light, and as our sea ice melts, less and less ice is reflected and more light is absorbed in the form of heat. And as you can tell from this photo, the color of the water is much darker than the sea ice. And as the water warms, it actually speeds up the rate that the ice is melting. Ice is also melting because of global ocean circulation. When we layer this temperature change on top of that, we begin to see changes in ocean circulation, which affects currents in the ocean. Now, there are 2 things you should know about water. First, fresh water floats and salt water sinks. And that's because salt water is heavier than fresh water and it's more dense. And that is why you can float in the ocean easier than you can float in a pool. And second, warm water floats and cold water sinks. And that's because cold water is heavier than warm water. So water sinks in places where it's cold, and that in turn affects currents. And remember, zooplankton are drifting organisms, so they move with the currents. So as temperatures increase in the eastern Bering Sea, we'll see an increase in ice melt. And ice is made up of fresh water. Now let's look at this cool animation really quick. Let's see if I can, hold on, there we go. Okay, can you guys see that?
Yep, we're seeing the green arrows going off to the right and the red arrows at the top going to the left.
All right, so notice when the air temperature is cold, we have a lot of ice, this big iceberg, we have a lot of ice, and the salinity or the amount of salt in the water is high, and these conditions give us strong and fast currents. And notice that the warmer water is sinking and becoming colder. And then as we increase the temperature, you notice that the ice begins to melt. The amount of salt decreases because of the ice melting and introducing fresh water, and the current slows down. Isn't that crazy? So this is how warming waters and global warming is affecting currents in our ocean. All right.
And just so that everybody in the audience knows, we do have a link to this on our NOAA Live Alaska website.
So how are plankton affected by these changes? Well, using NASA satellites, we can actually measure the amount of chlorophyll in our oceans. And chlorophyll is what gives pigmentation or color to plants' leaves, and it's how they're able to perform photosynthesis. And we use chlorophyll measurements to estimate how much algae and phytoplankton are in our oceans. And looking at global trends in phytoplankton size, we can see that the smallest phytoplankton are located here by the equator, and where it's really warm, and we see it increases in size as we move towards the poles and temperature decreases and becomes colder. And this is where we would expect to see highly productive ecosystems like the Eastern Bering Sea shelf. Now, some scientists believe that this trend will also be observed in zooplankton, and we expect to see smaller zooplankton as ocean temperatures become warmer. And this is actually what my current research is looking into and trying to answer. Are zooplankton getting smaller as our oceans warm? Why do you think zooplankton size is important?
So why do you think that it would be important to have bigger zooplankton versus smaller zooplankton if animals are eating large bunches of zooplankton anyway? What do you think would be the importance of the size of the individual zooplankton that animals are eating? So let's see. There's a little bit of a delay in folks typing in, but what I'm seeing is, let's see, Akutan School is saying that the quantity of the biomass total, so biomass meaning the amount of mass of animals that are being eaten. So you could either have lots and lots of small zooplankton or fewer larger zooplankton for the same amount of biomass. Karen is saying that it's important because it would be energy for the next trophic level. Alexander is saying that there's not enough nutrients in small zooplankton. And so Carol is saying the more size is more for large, if there's bigger zooplankton, maybe there would be more for larger animals to eat. And John is saying if the zooplankton are smaller, they would eat the smaller food and be hungry because there wasn't enough energy there. So yeah, that's the same thing Carl's saying, is smaller zooplankton means less energy to transfer. So
that is right on the head, nail on the head. Yeah, the difference between eating a small skinny copepod and a big fat juicy one is like the difference between eating a salad and a burger. So which would you like for dinner if you wanted to gain weight to survive the winter? I know I would want a burger. Now, we remember this food web from earlier. Smaller zooplankton means we have less fat, and fat is converted into energy. And if there's less fat, that means there's less energy available to the higher trophic level. So you guys nailed it. You guys are really, so I'm very impressed. This is my last little question slide, and then we'll go into why it matters, and then that's the end. So we're almost there.
Okay, well, we have about 12 minutes left, so maybe we'll take one or two questions and then keep moving. So Akutan School was saying that smaller zooplankton won't be eaten by something that's used to eating larger zooplankton. So maybe that's part of what you were talking about in terms of energy. Karina was asking about the energy transfer, the 10% per trophic level that you had talked about at the beginning. So she was wondering whether is the blue whale getting more energy from krill compared to fish eating krill, or is it less?
Less, yeah. So the trophic level closest to what it's eating will get the most energy, and the one that's further away will get the least amount of energy. So if we're talking about krill, the fish that eat the krill, they get the most energy, and then the whale that eats the fish that eats the krill won't get as much. They'll only get half the amount of energy that the fish got.
Okay, great.
All right. So why do you think how zooplankton are affected by climate change matters for communities and people like you and me?
So what do you think the impact on smaller zooplankton being in the ocean, say when it's warmer out, when the water is warmer, how does that impact us? How does it connect to your communities or what you eat at your dinner table? What do you guys think? So what I would think is that maybe it matters because people eat fish for lunch or dinner. Alexander is saying that there's a food chain impact, so that there's less food for animals. That's sort of a bigger world connection. Texas is saying that the smaller zooplankton would mean less fish for the fisheries. Like if the fish don't eat the zooplankton or they don't grow as much, maybe there's less fish for the fisheries to catch. And that's what Akatan School is saying, is that if there's less zooplankton, there's less food for the fish that we would catch, so fewer fish that you eat at your dinner table. So yeah, I think that that's kind of what their impacts are talking about.
Absolutely. So 5 of Alaska's fishing ports are consistently ranked in the top 10 ports in the country in terms of volume or weight, which means they catch the most fish in the entire country. 58% of the fish that's caught in the United States comes from Alaska. And Dutch Harbor has taken the #1 spot every year since 1996, landing 763 million pounds in just 2018. So it's hard for me to imagine how much fish that is. So let's look at it in terms of how many space shuttles it is. Now, space shuttles are very big. They are 122 feet long and they weigh 4.5 million pounds. So in terms of weight, Dutch Harbor catches 173 space shuttles worth of fish a year. And the Aleutian Islands catch 123 space shuttles, and Kodiak catches 89. And that is a lot of fish just coming from Alaska. And the seafood industry is also one of the largest employers in Alaska, employing about 68,700 people. And that means 1 in 11 people in the state of Alaska are able to support their families because of the fishing industry. Is there anyone on the call today from Alaska that has a family member that's a fisherman or knows someone who's a fisherman? My grandfather was a fisherman in Florida and he caught shrimp, and I know my family heavily relied on what my grandfather was able to catch when he went out to sea.
So the students from Akatan School are saying yes, they know family members and community members who are involved in the commercial fishing industry, and so they're saying that commercial fishing would decline significantly. So there's a huge economic impact of zooplankton being smaller. And they also had indicated that Akatan has the largest cannery in North America. So
yeah,
it would be a big impact to them. And then even Jasper and Juneau were saying that they also know people that are involved in the fishing communities.
Yeah.
And lots of folks in Tyonek as well.
Oh my goodness. And we also have to take into account that you can only fish for certain things seasonally. You know, the time period to go fishing for salmon is about 3 months out of the year. And you can only, I think you can only go fishing for crab, maybe 6 months, 5 to 6 months out of the year. So this is a very small period and they don't have all year to fish. So they only have a short period of time to make up a lot of the money that will support them for the rest of the year. So it's very, very important for the livelihood of people to be able to fish when they're permitted to. So the reason Alaska has had so much success producing fish over time is due to their commitment to sustainability, which ensures that all of Alaska's commercially caught seafood are sustainable for both current and future generations. And that means they partner with local communities and fishermen and scientists like myself to make sure that fisheries are healthy and that there's enough fish available to be caught. And if they believe that the fisheries aren't as healthy one year than, you know, compared to the last, they'll either close down the fisheries so no fish are caught, or they'll limit how many pounds of fish are allowed to be caught that season to protect the fisheries so it can keep going. And, you know, zooplankton are the reason why fisheries are, are doing well, are healthy, because that's what they eat. So whether you live in Alaska or not, wherever you're tuning into from today, the overall health of Alaska's fisheries will have effect on the food that you have available to eat. A lot of the fish that you see in the grocery stores, they all come from Alaska. Cod, pollock, crabs, lobsters, well, maybe not lobsters. Fish sticks, if you love fish sticks, which I do, that is all comes from Alaska's fishery. But it also affects the food that they eat. And how our oceans are affected by climate change is important for the economy and livelihoods. And like I said before, we couldn't have these productive fisheries without the zooplankton that support them. And it's also important for local indigenous cultures because it directly affects their historical practices and their natural resource use. Now, I love the environment in the ocean, and that's why I decided to become an oceanographer. And I hope all of you get the opportunity to see orcas in the wild or any other sea creature you fancy. Maybe you love polar bears or sharks or octopus. We just have to keep in mind that we share these beautiful ecosystems with them, and it's important that we protect it. And I believe that people protect the things they love. So I hope you guys get to go out there and explore your natural ecosystems and think about, how climate change affects it and what maybe that ecosystem will look like down the road. Thank you. Well, we have any more questions? I'm more than happy to answer them.
So we have a few more minutes for questions. If you have any other questions that you would like to ask. We had a question. So Karina had asked previously about whether whales get more energy from krill than fish eating krill. I think that she was asking whether whales eating krill get the same amount of energy as fish eating krill.
Okay, gotcha. So there are some whales, like baleen whales, if I'm not mistaken, that eat krill. They don't eat fish. They actually directly eat the krill like other fish do. And so they get the same amount of energy, but they just have to eat more. So if you didn't look into how much they have to eat, let's say the proportion was the same to their body weight, they do get the same amount of energy that a fish would eat. If let's say 50% of its diet was krill, then yes, they do get the same energy. I misunderstood that question earlier. That's a great question.
Okay, well, I think we are coming to the end of our time. So, so I'd like to thank everybody in our audience for tuning into our NOAA Live Alaska series. And thank you so much, Deana, for telling us about zooplankton today and what the impact of climate change is on zooplankton. We really appreciate it. And next week we will have Dr. Jessica Cherry talking about snow and how we measure snow and when we might get too much snow and what that means for our communities. So I hope you guys all tune in next week. Thank you, Deana, and thanks to everybody who came on the line for us. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for coming.